Hi, everyone. Welcome to the virtual road trip for AGE-u-cate. We see participants getting on very quickly, so as we are waiting for everybody to join in, I'll just say, in case you forgot, it is tax day in the era of COVID. So please don't panic if this was a new reminder. Just stay put for 1 hour. And remember that everything will be okay. We have to remind ourselves of that all the time, don't we? So people are still coming on. And so for those who are new to the virtual road trip, I will tell you this is our seventh one. We started in January for what we now consider the best decision we made, and we didn't know what a good decision it was in 2019 when we said, let's do a virtual road trip. And our team now every day is saying, wow, wasn't that a great decision we made? Because we would have been making a whole lot of changed plans, as many of you are doing. Okay, so we have looks like we're leveling off on our participant join-in. So I am going to go ahead and start and say welcome, everyone. I'm Pam Brandon, president and founder of AGE-u-cate Training Institute. Welcome to the virtual road trip, and we are thrilled to be talking about the robotic companion pets today. We're big fans of these little guys and have a lot to share with you with some terrific speakers. For those of you who are not familiar with AGE-u-cate, we develop and deliver innovative education for dementia training. Three of our core products are Dementia Live Simulation Experience, the Compassionate Touch, Skilled Touch Techniques program, and the Reminiscence program called Flashback, which is a dynamic life engagement and staff training program. That's a little bit about us. I want to go ahead and dive right in because we've got a lot to talk about today. So we've got Jim Murphy from, actually he's in Maryland, but the home office of Ageless Innovation is in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and Juliet Holt-Klinger from Chicago. So let me go ahead and get things started, and so we'll go from there. We still have people coming on, but they can just catch up as they come along, and we'll just go ahead and dig right in. So as we all know, no big surprise that the COVID pandemic is causing widespread concerns about the effects of loneliness and social isolation, and the emotional well-being of our elders, and how it is affecting their quality of life and quality of care, and especially for those living with dementia. Our guests today, Jim and Juliet, are going to share the findings of the studies that have been done across the healthcare spectrum to support the impact of robotic companion pets. We've had the honor to work with the Ageless Innovation team in this past year, developing their companion pet specialist training program, and I will tell you that we have witnessed firsthand through the pilot projects that we've done with the pets and the training that we've done in elder care communities, and seeing for ourselves the remarkable benefits that these pets have. They are truly incredible therapeutic tools. So let's start by giving you a little bit of background on our speakers. Jim Murphy is Senior Vice President of Ageless Innovation, and Juliet Holt-Klinger is Senior Director of Dementia Care for Brookdale Senior Living. Wonderful to see both of you again. Jim, after spending many years in the role of innovation at United Healthcare's Medicare division, he joined Ageless Innovation earlier this year. And I'm anxious to hear, as I'm sure all of you will hear, the story of how he became attuned to joy for all companion pets since their birth. Jim is also a board member of the National Alliance for Caregiving. Juliet is a gerontologist specializing in person-centered programs for people living with dementia. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the conversation today. We're so happy that you've joined us. We know how busy you are, Juliet. She is Senior Director of Dementia Care at Brookdale and also a board member of Pioneer Network. So with this, you've got a lot to talk about. I am going to turn the rest of the program over to both of you, and then I'll come back at the end. So take it away from here, Juliet and Jim.
Thank you, Pam.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share my screen and wait for Van to validate when I have. You all can see my screen, I take it?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, Pam, thank you so much for having Juliet and myself. And I just wanted to start with an acknowledgement of thank you to all those that joined, as we know that many of you all are either on the front lines or leading those that are on the front lines in the delivery of care relative to this COVID-19 crisis. And we've heard a lot of feedback from our partners, a lot of stories along the way from our partners over the last few months, as I'm sure you all have heard and shared. And I think you'll hear some of those come out through the sharing of information today. So as Pam mentioned, the meat of what we're going to share today is really rooted in a few things. So the first one is we have, over the last few years, conducted a number of studies where there were in various different settings with various different populations. And throughout these studies, some common themes of impact and benefit, primarily rooted in psychosocial benefit, arose. And so we're going to share the detail of that with you all today. The second piece is the exacerbation of social isolation and loneliness. We know that measures associated with social distancing and COVID are appropriate and needed in our long-term care facilities as well as in general. But that being said, we also know that they're having the impact of exacerbating social isolation and loneliness. And we want to share information relative to things that we've heard over the last few months on that front. And then lastly, this is an opportunity for you all. We're going to have 3 points where we're just going to stop and pause along the way with some flash survey questions. And the flash survey questions are going to be quickly followed up with an opportunity to be able to win a robotic companion pet. So I'm going to start with my own personal journey relative to ageless innovation and the Joy for All companion pets. So about 5 years ago or so, the CEO of, the now CEO of Ageless Innovation, who was head of the strategic business unit at Hasbro at the time, visited a number of us at United Healthcare with various different ideas. At that time, they were just rolling out the Joy for All companion pet, and it was really an advent within Hasbro, an organization that, as you all are familiar with, is focused on products for younger individuals. But through the strategic business unit and some consumer insights about a toy that they had already developed called For Real Friend, which is a robotic pet, they learned that about 20% of purchases were actually for an older individual, for a loved one. And they took this insight and through co-development with older individuals and their family caregivers, birthed the Joy for All companion pet, which was the first one outside of the toy aisle and was designed for older individuals. The rollout of Joy for All began as very much of a direct-to-consumer type of approach. And I'll have to say that in this first meeting, while I struggled to maintain curiosity, I really, frankly, started from a point of skepticism and was struggling to keep an open mind. Um, and I think that through the organic consumer reviews and homemade videos that were posted in early 2016 when the product was rolling out, that it began to get me from skeptical to curious and ultimately intrigued about the potential impact it could make relative to older individuals and United's Medicare population specifically. And you can see on screen, these were a sampling of some of the types of reviews that were showing up organically through the purchase of Joy for All companion pets for a loved one. I'll also say that apparently I was not the only one who was intrigued by this. Um, there were a number of different healthcare organizations across the spectrum, from long-term care, memory care, uh, other providers and payers, academic organizations, governmental organizations that were intrigued by the potential impact that could be made with Joy for All companion pets. And it was primarily rooted in two different use cases or populations. The first one supporting individuals with dementia and their caregivers, and the second one rooted in the notion of social isolation and loneliness, knowing that these are two of the biggest challenges in serving older populations, and two, in describing that, there's a lot of comorbidity and overlap in those two things. So over time, there have been more than 10 pilots, 10 research projects conducted, and that's what we're going to be sharing a bit more today. So pop-up survey question number one, and Van from AGE-u-cate is going to help us with some of the polling here, but we'd be curious to know how many of you make use of animal-assisted therapy in your work environment? And we'll give it a little time here for you all to answer. And part of the reason why we're asking the question is there certainly are parallels. And while the birth of Joy for All wasn't directly inspired by animal-assisted therapy, it was instead inspired by the consumer insights that I referenced, there certainly were parallels. And as I began thinking more about this in the early days while I was at United and saw those reviews, what I began to understand was there may be parallels to all the science-based research that's been done as it relates to animal-assisted therapy. So, do you use animal-assisted therapy in your work environment? About a little more than half of you do today. Okay. And next, we are going to give an opportunity. As I mentioned, there are 3 opportunities along with these pop-up survey questions to be able to win a robotic companion pet. So the name of the game is Guess the Celebrity Pet. It's going to be a celebrity pet that we're going to flash on screen, and the first one to populate the chat box with the correct name of the pet will win a robotic companion pet. We'll gather your information through that chat and then get it shipped to you. Everybody ready? And Van, if you can let me know when we have a correct answer, that would be great. Van, do we have a correct answer as of yet? I think you might be on mute.
We do.
Okay. And so as we have a correct answer, it is Morris the cat, and I am guessing that it's probably somebody that's closer to Julia and myself, our demographics. As I was picking this and I showed a fellow coworker this, and his response was, "Who's that?"
Who's that?
So I realized folks might not have seen this for a while. So thanks for playing along. So now we're going to get into a high-level overview of the key findings, while we're going to showcase some of the specific findings in more detail and and speak to some of the different organizations that were involved, the themes that showed up across populations, across settings, were the psychosocial benefits associated with reduced feelings of depression, isolation, and loneliness. The fact that when there was a criteria for individuals with Alzheimer's to be participants in the study, that it mitigated dementia-related decline and associated behavioral issues. It provided an engaging experience that calms individuals without the use of medication. It improved cognitive activity and capability. It helped to provide a sense of purpose. And then it reduced the burden of care for care partners, whether those were professional care partners in a long-term care setting, for example, or whether they were family caregivers helping in a home setting. So I think that this is where I want to bring Juliet into the conversation a little more. Juliet, you and I had an opportunity to meet about 4 years ago or so, and it was at a conference where I think at the time I was still wrestling with that skepticism a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think at the time it was very early days for you as well. And could you speak a little bit about kind of your original impressions of Joy for All Companion Pets and kind of what your starting point was around that?
Sure. I have a similar origin story to my relationship with the pets as you do, in that I think the first time I encountered them, I was pretty skeptical. You know, we've tried very hard at Brookdale. You know, a big portion of what we do at Brookdale is memory care. And you know, over the last 15 years, really tried to develop a program and an environment in our Clarebridge programs that doesn't feature anything fake. And so for me, when I saw the pets, my original response was, no way, no how, you know, we're not having stuffed animals. I'd been working for years to get rid of all the stuffed animals. So I really had a response to them that was pretty negative. And our friends there are pretty persuasive and talked me into a small pilot. We did try them in the communities, and after that, the results of that pilot came through. I was a genuine fan. I think when you see the response that the residents have to the pets, it's really really pretty overwhelming. So I came from that same place of skepticism, and you know, we really vet technology pretty carefully at Brookdale. And that's the other thing that I'll say is just that when I first encountered the Ageless Innovation team, they were all still at Hasbro. And I think it was very interesting to watch them pivot from creating products for children and creating toys to therapeutics, and to really begin to consider an aging population and dementia more specifically. So I think that journey for them has been very thoughtful, and so yeah, I think they've convinced me for sure, taken me from that skeptical place to a true believer.
But it's similar to me. It sounds like it was really witnessing, for me, the qualitative and quantitative aspects of the results. It sounds like through Brookdale's memory units that you were getting a lot of positive feedback from, I imagine, from staff, residents, family caregivers. Could you talk a little bit more about what that looked like?
Sure. I mean, we didn't do a formal study or a scientific research study or anything like that. Oftentimes we rely on others to provide the vetted research on products. But when I run a pilot, I certainly put whatever it is I'm trying to vet out there, and then we rely on the feedback of our program coordinators. But it's often the anecdotal stories that convince us that that we need to move forward with a certain product or a certain training method or approach. So it certainly was those anecdotal stories that swayed me. You know, we had folks that just instantly responded to the pets, and I feel the majority of our residents understand that the pet is not real, and we always present it and talk about it as a robot and as a companion pet. And so while there may be times when folks confuse the pet for a former pet, more often than not, they are, really spending time in reminiscing about former pets. They spend one of the things that I've loved is just the sense of purpose that we see with the residents. They really begin to care for the animal and begin to consider it through their day. This often results in us needing to purchase more pets so we don't have custody battles. But they will travel. We had one woman who would put the cat in her walker basket, and the cat just never left her walker. She always had it with her in her walker basket and took it with her everywhere she went. A real cat's just not going to do that. And we certainly embrace real animals at Brookdale, and have many communities that have multiple animals, live animals. And so I in no way think that the robotic pets replace that relationship, but I think for many of our residents, especially with cats, it's hard to get a cat to really stay with one person and to do what you want for very long. So we've had a lot of luck with people really feeling attached to the cat and feeling that sense of purpose. They name the pets, they brush the pets, they pet the pets, right? I mean, there's a lot to do with the pets.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. And as we go further into some of the specific findings, please add on or amplify anything that resonates for you along the way. Awesome. So now we're going to go on a pop-up survey question number 2. How many of you make use of other robotic pets? And I'll emphasize not Joy for All companion pets. So like Pero or other robotic pets that are out there on the market, how many of you currently make use of those in your work environment? So Van, is the poll that you have on screen, is it being populated at all?
It is.
Awesome.
We're ending it now. And here are the results.
Okay, interesting. So a small percentage use other robotic pets in their care routines. I'm not familiar with others. We like to think that we're unique in the marketplace based on the form factor that we've created. And I didn't even know robotic pets were a thing. So we're glad that you showed up to this session. And now I'm going to give an opportunity to guess the celebrity pet. Once again, please populate the chat box with your guess of the name. And there are actually 2 correct answers to this, so we'll see which one comes up.
Tough one.
And Van, just let me know when you have a correct answer, or when you believe to be correct. This golden retriever was quite the star, and apparently showed up in a number of different things that folks might recognize. But
We have one.
okay, so the correct answer is either Comet, the dog from Full House, with Uncle Jesse and team, or Buddy from Air Bud, if people remember that film. Okay, so now we're going to really dive into the meat of some of these findings. And as I mentioned, These were cross-cutting a number of different studies, and I'm going to reference a couple of them relative to each one of these, and then really what you'll see showcased specific to each finding is a specific poignant point that we drew out from a particular study. So one is, as I mentioned before, it reduced anxiety and agitation and or use of medication. So this was found through a number of different studies from JMU and Alacare, a home health and hospice company. And I think that their comment that the person was withdrawn, rarely interactive, and frequently mumbled incoherently. With the introduction of the pup, the patient would smile, laugh, talk to, and pick up the pet. Her son observed that as a result, she was more responsive to him. And this is something that we found intrinsic to all of the deployment of the robotic companion pets. The team actually refers to these as somewhat magnetic in the sense that they create social interaction. Just like a real dog, you could meet a total stranger and have a common point of conversation, provided that they like dogs or cats. But similarly, it creates this interaction, it creates this dialogue, whether it's between a resident and professional caregiver, whether it's between an older individual and a family member, and we've seen multi-generational play come out through this as well. Improved mood, well-being, and decreased depression. And specifically here, the points that we're making in the meanwhile were studies and findings as it related to studies that were focused on those with dementia. In a little bit, we're going to get to some findings as it related to not necessarily those with dementia, although it wasn't an exclusion criteria, but more so that were focused specifically around social isolation and loneliness. So next, and Alzheimer's Association has documented the symptoms of depression as social isolation or withdrawal, disruption in sleep, appetite, agitation, irritability, slowed behavior. We saw improved mood, well-being, and decreased depression. And a JMU study, I think, highlights that really well. I think the reason we've had such a decrease in behaviors and problems with resident number 2 is because of the cat. She used to be very agitated when she was in a skilled nursing facility. And I think that this cat has helped her transition to long-term care. Improved cognition. A number of different studies were focused on various different aspects of cognition, but I think one in particular, the Florida Atlantic University study, one of the measures they looked at was the mini mental state exam. And they found that during the course of this relatively small study, that the MMSE scores improved in over 2/3 of the participants. These included improvements in patients' memory, positive behaviors, and reduction in the risk of depression. Family caregivers also reported varied positive benefits at home with the pets after completion of the project, such as their loved one with dementia remembering that they had a pet and wanting to sleep with the pet.
You know, Jim, hop in here. I think this is really important because I think if we look at the overall effects or negative effects of disengagement, and I think if everybody who's a provider on the line with us can think about what disengagement looks like, right? Sometimes people think people are asleep, you know, during the day in an activity. It's really disengagement. And, you know, depression, agitation, restlessness are all, you know, symptoms of being disengaged. But so is, you know, really functioning at a lower level or functioning at a level that's appears more impaired really than people are with their dementia. And so I think, you know, sometimes when we see these groups of folks who are really disengaged, they look a lot lower functioning on a dementia scale or from a dementia stage standpoint And as you see people brighten, become engaged, become engaged in really meaningful activity and meaningful tasks and meaningful relationships, you'll often see improved cognition. And so I think we really shouldn't underestimate that finding. I think remaining engaged can improve cognition, and I think it's really important to remember that.
That's really helpful, Julia. Thank you. So I'm reading that is disengagement really, is a parallel with decline or a cause of decline and vice versa?
Correct. And I think, people become disengaged for various reasons. Sometimes it's an environmental issue. There's not enough going on to engage them, or what has been offered to engage them isn't person-centered and doesn't interest them. But I also think we know that the loss of initiative occurs very early on in the dementia path, right? So people, even in the pretty early stages of dementia, can have a loss of initiative to begin an activity or start an activity for themselves. So if people aren't engaged by others, or engaged in this case by artificially intelligent robotic companion pet, right, then they won't become engaged. So I think it's really important that that we remember that lack of initiative is an issue for folks.
Great, thank you for ringing in on that.
Sure.
Reduced delirium in hospital patients was another specific finding. And as I mentioned before, these studies were across various different settings, including long-term care settings. There were a couple that were specifically focused on the hospital setting, an ICU setting, one being Pace University and another being the Albany Medical College. And what I'll say is they were curious and looking to understand whether the companion pets could reduce delirium in hospitalized patients. And Albany Medical College found our pilot study found that robotic pets could be a feasible intervention to mitigate the behavioral disturbances in selected patients with ICU delirium. And improved quality of care was another thematic finding relative to these various different studies. And we know that this is within the context of a shrinking universe of family caregivers when you're talking about the dynamic of out in the community, and B, a shrinking universe and stretched bandwidth when you talk about professional caregivers in various different settings. So AFADAS, which is a large organization of relatives of Alzheimer's patients in Spain, we thought their study encapsulated this very well. We've discovered a suitable activity that stimulates users so they are able to keep attention and occupation during a long time. In this way, the time the occupational therapy staff can be distributed to the rest of the group's users. Emotionally, the robot has been able to awaken in them hidden emotions such as comfort, joy, affection, empathy, socialization, among others. And we think this is important not only to the quality of the care of the individual that is interacting with the companion pet, but when you talk about the staff's time relative to the quality of care of the other residents at that time as well, is extremely important. So we think there's a larger scale benefit here.
And again, Jim, I think there's an element of the pet itself that really helps to re-engage. So we know anyone in the middle stages of the disease or beyond really needs their starter button reignited again, related to that lack of initiative. So you could start somebody on an activity and go off and take care of some other folks, and those activity professionals in our audience know that very often you have to return to that one person and reignite that activity over and over again and reprompt them to become engaged again. One of the beauties of these pets is their responsiveness to any movement, so that they reignite the engagement themselves because of their their artificial intelligence, really, and because of their ability to interact with the person. So you can, you can sort of walk away from this interaction without having to re-prompt the person often to pet the cat again. They'll do it on their own. So.
Yeah, and I think the interesting piece of the design from early on, it remains today. I think you and I have talked about this before, is the cat acts like a cat and the dog acts like a dog,
Yeah.
right? Which is in the sense that the dog has bark back technology where when you're interacting with it, much like a dog, it's going to have that kind of direct response to you. Whereas the cat often acts like cats. While they can't walk off on their own, they do have that random algorithm of behavior relative to the way that you interact with and a rather unpredictable way of responding to your interactions with the companion pet.
No.
So I think they embody them both pretty well.
No.
Reduce burden of care, and I know that burden is a loaded term, so we obviously never use that in any sort of consumer or person-centered language, but for purposes of this conversation and the research that's been done, we looked at burden of care, knowing that burden of care could be associated with a professional caregiver or that of a family caregiver. And we've seen that robotic companion pets also reduce the burden placed on caregivers by providing a non-pharmacological intervention for agitation and loneliness. And that was from a JMU study. Okay, the last survey question, pop-up survey question. And right after this, the last opportunity to win a robotic companion pet. How many of you make use of Joy for All companion pets in your work environment today? And we'll give it just a little bit. And Van, just let us know when you feel like we've gotten a critical mass here. Okay, so a little less than half of you today, and the other half, might be one of your first exposures to Joy for All. All right, and this was a Juliet's inspired suggestion, so she definitely gets credit for this selection. So once again, first one to ring into the chat box will win a robotic companion pet.
It's an easy one.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that was pretty easy.
We have our answer.
That was quick.
And wait, it wasn't me or Juliet, right, Van?
Correct.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to round this out with sharing just a couple more high-level descriptions of findings that are focused on social isolation and loneliness. And the first one that I'm going to mention is the one that I spearheaded within United Healthcare. And it is one where it was focused on social isolation and loneliness, as that was already a big issue relative to the Medicare population and at the time, our interactions with AARP, who was also and continues to this day to be very focused on battling social isolation and loneliness. And so we had at the time conducted an HRA where we had visibility for Medicare members who were already moderately to severely lonely. We looked to interact with them to understand whether they'd want to participate in this study. It's a relatively large-scale study with over 200 participants. And over the course of 2 months, we looked to understand a number of measures having to do with reduction of loneliness and improved well-being in the form of purpose, resilience, and other various different measures. And this is a study where it was recently published in Aging and Mental Health uh, after the fact, but it was a study that we had all of our hypotheses confirmed. And this was, for me, one of the more exciting things that I got to work on over my last few years at United, and a big reason, obviously, why I joined the team at Ageless Innovation. And then another pilot that was conducted at the beginning about a year and a half ago was one where we had interacted with the director of the New York State Office for Aging, and he wanted to test these with individuals who were being served through various different AAA programs and put them out in the community. So it began as a relatively small study, but what was determined was that the pets were able to reduce loneliness among 70% of the pilot participants. And this really got the New York State Office for Aging engaged, and that kind of leads us to today in the current environment. So one is we have had an incredible amount of interaction and conversation with individuals in long-term care facilities who are battling the COVID-19 crisis on a daily basis, who are looking to deploy our robotic companion pets as just another tool in the toolbox, like tablets, but also most recently through private-public partnerships with New York as well as many other states, units on aging and the AAA offices as the means to be able to get these robotic companion pets out into the community and into communities. And so over the last few months and in these various different relationships, we've distributed literally thousands of units in various different states. And the impact and the stories that have been shared back, similar to those stories that have been shared from our long-term care partners, has been extremely meaningful. And so, approaching a summary here, as Pam mentioned in the beginning, we engaged AGE-u-cate Training Institute a while back to be able to develop this robotic pet specialist training, including of an online e-learn module, as well as a companion pets user guide. And the dynamic here is one, while you've heard Juliet and myself both describe the Joy for All companion pets as being very intuitive to the user, and that's frankly part of the beauty. At the same time, we believe that the proper training relative to the introduction of the pet, as well as the ongoing interaction with the pet, is one where having this training was a really important part of and complement to the deployment of the robotic companion pets, and specifically has been approved for CE activity credits. And then lastly, before going to any Q&A and additional dialogue, is that once again, I want to thank you very much, especially in this environment, for taking the time out to be able to attend this session of the virtual road trip. AGE-u-cate is going to issue a follow-up email where you're going to have a link to the full impact and benefit white paper that has a lot more detail than what I just shared. Additionally, a link to the Joy for All companion pets virtual training as well. So with that, I will thank Pam and Van for having us. I will thank Juliet for being such an incredible partner and sharing her stories, and I'll listen out for any Q&A.
All right, we'll look for that chat. Oh, we've got some here, so Dan, I'll let you get that before we wrap it up. What would be the best way to clean the pets?
Yeah, so we do have a cleaning protocol that is available on our website. So the cleaning protocol entails spraying the fur with Dapple cleaner or similar non-toxic toy cleaner, and gently wiping with a clean towel, repeating if necessary, and also includes, because of the electronics and the way that the pet has been created, to specifically not put it under running water, as you can imagine. Um, and so gently wiping the clean fur with a towel, avoid area around eyes and nose, let the fur dry, and then wipe down the fur with a PDI super sandy cloth wipe. But once again, all this information is available on our website.
Pam, do you want me to add a little bit? I think, you know, in the age of COVID, we've also just gotten more pets, and I think not had as much shared usage of really any of our supplies, but the pets as well. And the other bit of advice would be to clean the person who's using the pet after the use of the pet, and to make sure that we're doing good hand washing before and after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Next question from Gladys. Is there a way that the pet is programmed to respond or not respond to certain stimuli?
Good question.
Good
Yeah, and I
question.
spoke to that a little bit, but just to expound upon that, the dog really is programmed to act like most dogs that I've met, and similarly cats, right? The dog is very reciprocal in its reaction through bark back technology and predictable ways in which you touch the pet and it responds. And the dog also has technology that feels like a beating heart, whereas the cat is rather unpredictable, as many cats are, and you know, just because you pet it one way and it reacts a particular way that time, it may react differently the next time. And then it's also got a purring technology, as you would expect from a cat as well, which is rather calming.
John asks, my mother is 101, no dementia, just short-term memory loss. Would you still recommend it for her?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so love to hear any additional thoughts Juliet had, but I'll say that my starting point in the beginning was one where I think that the use case around Alzheimer's became clearer and clearer for me. But then the question became one around just social isolation and loneliness, and would an individual who doesn't have cognitive issues still appreciate this? And what we saw, especially through the United study, was that the answer is yes, that the vast majority of individuals, it doesn't matter whether they've owned a pet before or not, which was another hypothesis that we were looking at, is as long as they have an affinity for it through the introduction of it, then, you know, then introduced in those neutral terms, that we'll see that they'll want to continue to interact with it. Some individuals, and I'll be blunt, some individuals who may not have an affinity for pets may not have an affinity for either the cat or dog, and it's not going to be their thing. We've certainly seen that as well.
I would just add, one of my use cases while I was vetting out the pets was to have my in-laws look at it, and my mother-in-law, who is from Ecuador, and in Ecuador you don't have animals of any kind in the house, so she's never had a pet, doesn't really believe in pets, and she and doesn't have any dementia at all. And when I put the cat in front of her, I mean, she loved the cat, and enjoyed grooming the cat. She has no dementia. She's in her, you know, mid 60s. So she just loved it. So I agree. I don't think that dementia is necessary for the use case by any means.
Mm-hmm. Another question on just the cleaning procedure. Does that disinfect the pet? The cleaning procedures that you shared, Jim, and you both might want to address this in infection control procedures of today. So either one of you, if you want to address that.
Yeah, Juliet, do you want to start with?
I would just say, by today's standards, no. I would not assume that cleaning it with the dapple is disinfected. Disinfect is a pretty big word. I think it cleanses the pet and certainly can wipe off surface pieces. But in terms of COVID uses and so forth, as I said, I would be wary of shared use at this point. Unless you have a population that you have just tested and everyone is negative. And I think there's definitely a case there's other cases for multiple pets if you have multiple people that you're working with. The dapple does a good job of cleaning it, but I don't think I'd use the term disinfect. I don't know, Jim, maybe you've done studies on the.
I think that's a good description. What I would add to it is, so I would say one is that it's intentionally designed with a price point to be very different from Pero and other robotic pets, that have been introduced before. So at a little more than $100 per unit, it's intentionally designed for mostly one-on-one use. That being said, we also recognize that in certain settings, budgets might not allow for that. And we have heard, Juliet, exactly as you described, which is through a lot of our different nursing home partners have described, where they have COVID positive users, where they've already identified that all these individuals have COVID, and if they're not ill and still in a position to be able to engage with the pet, that they are, because in a shared use fashion, because they understand that all these individuals are COVID positive. Similarly, as you described, if individuals have all been tested and are determined not to be, there are also environments where that is occurring from a shared perspective as well. But yeah, I think, Juliet, you captured it really well.
Then there's just a couple other questions. I'll say hi, Karen from JEA, and the answer is yes. You can reach out to me about a presentation or Jim directly. So certainly they'd be willing to do that. I'll just say from Jim, they would be thrilled to do that. Will there be another breed of dogs made? Do you have other plans for other breeds?
So I'll speak a little bit cryptically to that, because I think my boss might be one of the attendees on this call. So I will say that we do have another similar pup in the future, as well as plans for additional functionality over the course of time relative to the Joy for All companion pets in general. So, while we think that they serve the use cases we've described really well today, we're constantly looking at how they might provide additional value for the populations we've described or other populations.
Great. Good questions. I want to just add that as we were creating the user guide and the training for care partner training for the use of robotic pets, it brought to mind, we were working with James L. West Center for Dementia Care here in Fort Worth, and we went into their community to video. And more than one time we had, watching the care partner engagement and how we saw the people using the pets just come alive, and some, that started singing to them, and just the engagement between the care partners and the engagement then that happened among the residents themselves, where the care partner actually could walk away and they were engaging with conversation with the pet. And more than one time we were videoing and we just couldn't stop videoing because it was so transformational to watch it. As everyone knows, therapeutic tools, this may not be for everyone, but if it is something that works for that person, it can work beautifully. And so again, that's why we're big fans of this. So I think it was a great presentation on just the studies, the many studies that you've had behind it, the many stories. So thank you both. I think you've enlightened many people out there, and certainly for those of us in this space who are really caring so much about solutions, especially right now, to the isolation and the quarantine, and you know what the fallout of this may be. This might be a solution that will work for your resident, one of your clients, or your loved one. So, so again, thank you so much. And with that, I want to take just a minute to invite you to be back in August, on August 19th. We are going to be talking to Penny Cook, the CEO from Pioneer Network, along with Janine Fink-Boyle, the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs from Leading Age, and Jody Igor, the Director of Nursing and Quality Care for Leading Age, and panel discussion with me on the future of long-term care in what is person-centered care going to look like? What have we taken steps back? What do we need to do with the since the arrival of COVID and moving forward? What's going to happen? I think we all ask ourselves that on a daily basis, but really some great conversation, and we're excited to bring that conversation to you. So thank you all for joining us. Go back, send in those tax returns or an extension. Take good care of yourself, and we'll see you next month. And thank you again, Jim and Juliet.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.